we have all staff meetings, and sometimes I've done this a couple different times where I've asked, hey, what would it take for people to own mistakes? And, they say the same thing. Like people love me owning mistakes, right?
Yeah.
But then I'll ask people to step to the mic in front of the entire company and be like, hey, I'll unburden anybody right now. And they'll come up and they'll say, I made mistake for X. And I'll go like, you are relieved. And it just, so you are relieved.
You're free.
Yeah, you're free.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Culture Goodr podcast with Stephen Leese and Shaun. This podcast is a behind the shades look at creating and changing culture inside of Goodr sunglasses. You can live with the status quo, you can challenge the status quo, or you can do what we do at Goodr and status the quo challenge.
Hey, thanks for owning that, Stephen. So if I walked into your office and started meeting with those same words, I fucked something up and I need to own it, how's that going to go?
Well, usually it goes pretty great. So this thing we always say at Goodr is no one ever gets in trouble for fucking up. They get in trouble for not taking ownership and fixing it.
Right.
And we've talked about it before, but if you start any conversation with anybody, usually with like, hey, I fucked something up and I need to own it, that person has to be a complete asshole to not actually be connected with you at that moment.
Yeah. They just take okay, say more about that.
Right. Like I legit, like I screwed up my schedule today and it was my fault, nobody else's. And I could have done a fake intro. Mm-hmm. I mean, I chose not to because one, it's fun and it fits in. Right. But two, it is actually okay not to be perfect, contrary to popular belief. Like we all make quite a bit of mistakes all the time.
Yeah, for sure. So, the risk in owning a mistake is that it's going to break trust, right?
Yeah.
Do you feel like that builds or breaks trust?
Oh, right. I mean, it's quite the opposite. The whole Brene Brown marble jar concept, but people owning mistakes, people apologizing, people looking you in the eye and be like, hey, I'm sorry I let you down. Mm-hmm. That is an insane trust builder.
Yeah.
It is actually quite like magnificent how much that levels up trust between people. What are your thoughts?
Agreed. I was going to say we should explain the marble jar concept a little bit, right?
Oh, yeah.
So,
go ahead.
Okay. So the idea is that anytime someone does something like that, right, owns their mistakes, is transparent about something, follows through on what they say they'll do, it's like they're putting marbles in the imaginary jar, and that's building trust over time.
Yeah.
And anytime they do something that breaks trust, they're removing marbles from the jar or just dumping it out completely and breaking it. So that's the kind of the concept that we work with here is like, is this putting marbles in the jar or taking them out, right?
Yeah, right. And when somebody walks to my office and like, hey, I fucked something up, they're taking a handful of marbles and putting them in the jar. Mm-hmm. They're not tanking them out.
Yeah.
Right. That is like that's actually like the misconception. And it's a really big deal. Also, man, it just makes you feel better to get things out in the open when you do mess something up and take ownership.
For sure. It is natural to want to cover your ass though, right? Like I think most of us as humans, when we make a mistake, the first response is to defend. Like, oh, I need to explain this or defend myself in some way so that I don't lose standing or lose my reputation in your eyes. But that can backfire, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think that it can for sure backfire. I think it really depends on, I think we're conditioned to like not own our mistakes, right? Mm-hmm. I think that's just like a base level conditioning.
Yeah.
And it is a backfire where you imagine working with somebody and we've all worked with somebody who somebody has messed something up, or we ourselves, and you just can't bring yourself to say it. You are metaphorically just taking handful of marbles like out of the jar, and doing it. But the brilliant thing too is about ownership is if you realize you screw up and you fuck up owning something, you actually can come back in and be like, you know what? I want to redo. I didn't own that. Mm-hmm. Then you're actually
even
back.
More points. You're back.
Right. Yeah. and we talked about this thing of like, you start off right. You start off this meeting of, all right, we're all the same level, and you say I fucked something up. Well, you just move up in that book. Mm-hmm. And when you deny something, you move down. Yeah. Right. And so ownership, right. Like I do believe that is a very clear way to look at like how you are like you are leveling up in the eyes of the person if you're taking ownership and being very self-aware of what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
for sure. And it's also just a relief, right? You're not thinking, all right, now I got to remember that lie and keep backing that up.
Yeah, and I think it's also important for us to define like there. You can't also just hide behind. I'm owning it. There is like this.
Oh, you're right.
Right.
The flip side. Yeah.
Yeah, there is this thing of, all right, now did you just make a mistake or were you delinquent in your responsibilities? And there's a lot of blurry lines there. I mean, I'll try to unpack it quickly where like, hey, today for this podcast, we could have just pushed it later and I could have recorded it.
Right.
That would have screwed up, yours and Mateus's timeline. So that could have happened. I could have like tried to fake through it, but the reality is it's actually just way better to own it. So was this me being delinquent in my duty or me just making a mistake? It was me making a calculated mistake.
Right.
Right. That's what it was. Now, if you knocked on my office door and I didn't even know the podcast was coming up, well, that's actually me just probably being delinquent in my in my own role here. And so I don't know. I think there's just really an important ownership of like, yes, ownership is important and it's constant, but as long as you don't keep making the same mistake over and over again, that's probably the key. Is right. You don't repeat the same mistake categorically.
For sure, and then use your awareness of that mistake as a shield to be like, oh, it's all good because I know that I'm doing it.
Yeah,
right? Yeah,
and I think when you become comfortable with yourself and owning things, it's a very freeing place to live, right? It is. Everything seems to be everybody. I think for me, they're like, "Oh, everything goes your way." I was like, "No, it's just I don't dwell on the stuff that I fuck up really bad. I just own it, and move on."
right, for sure. Okay, so let's run some mistakes by me. What have you done at goodr that you're like, oopsie?
I mean, I think the biggest one that everybody always talks about is our Superfly model. We have an award here every year called I actually think it's officially called the fuck up of the year. I think we call it the flock up of the year, but I'm pretty sure on the belt it says fuck up of the year.
Really? Okay.
And it's modeled after this model we did called Superfly. And I, like a complete asshole, we bought a full container of those. And that was like, I think early 2019. So it's 82,000 units. And it was me being an idiot, brash, not understanding the full effect of that size of an order. And it was a major mistake, dollars-wise and energy-wise, spent on an unproven model. And it was a large mistake. Now it's like we have an award named after it.
Right.
I get to model it. So that's one that everybody here, I think, would talk about. I mean, I think there's other more interesting ones like until we were about 30, no, maybe until we were 50 people, I wanted to run goodr with no bosses. I would love to I'd love to still run goodr with no bosses, no flock leaders. It is just way harder than I thought it was going to be. And I thought we were going to be able to do it and probably held on a little too long. And that put some stress on the business and myself. And that was just a mistake. I wish I would have saw a little earlier, but we got through it.
Yeah.
And then I think more recently, us not investing in finance, ops, and scale way sooner than we should.
Yeah.
And like the Superfly is a very tangible thing and it's funny, but there are countless examples of mistakes I've made.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, I think we're all in that boat. You get the win on Superflies there.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's only you could make that call. But even just the way that you phrase things, I think, is important to taking ownership, right? Like you could have said, "Oh, I didn't have time to write the intro today," but you were like, "Oh, I didn't make time," or it was like you were, even as you're phrasing it, you have to take ownership in the wording that you choose.
Yeah.
And I notice you do that a lot, like the way that you approach
100%
presenting things.
I let my time get taken away today.
Yeah.
Right. I had the appropriate amount of time marked off. Things happened around goodr that I could have easily said, cool, I will talk to you about that at 5 p.m.
Right.
I'm recording a podcast and I have to write the intro. I let my time get taken. It was nobody's fault, right? Like this was my own fault.
Yeah.
And that's very important. Our ability to use like the right words is incredibly beneficial. Right. It's easy to say, oh, I can't do that. Well, usually we just won't do something instead of can't.
Yeah, right. Or you didn't, and you could have, but you didn't.
Yeah.
Right? It hurts more to be like, I did not do that.
I didn't make time.
I'm sorry. Yeah, right, exactly. but it keeps the power in your hands, right? And that's the key. Is like there's got to be a benefit to owning the mistake, which is what would you say?
I mean, the benefit of owning a mistake is you take its power.
Mm-hmm.
You're actually it almost, I don't know the psychology on this, but if you once you own it, it's not this like, I always appear like I love the definition of fear of like false evidence appearing as real.
Mm-hmm.
And you're really fearful of what's going to happen. Well, once you own it, you actually have taken all that power, good or bad. You don't actually, that's gone. Like now you're just in it. So I think that's the first and foremost, the first benefit. The second is, how are you going to move past it if you can't identify it? And that is third. And then as a leader, I think we have a responsibility to model the behavior we want. And if I want ownership, I have to model it.
Yes, fair.
Yeah.
There's one thing that always stands out to me. I'm pretty sure it's like a Spider-Man quote or something. With great power comes great responsibility. I love flipping that around, right? If I take great responsibility, then I have great power. Whereas if I blame it away, I'm also giving away my power to a situation, to other people, to all those things.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, back to the word selection, I used this example recently where I'm training for an ultra marathon, and I don't do anything Friday nights. And if you ask me to go out to dinner Friday night, I could say, oh, I can't. I have to train on Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
But that's actually a lie.
Right.
It's I won't.
Mm-hmm.
I'm choosing not to
Mm-hmm.
because I get to run on Saturday, right?
Yeah.
No one's making me run. I don't have to. And it's not that I won't go out with you. It's not that I can't go out with you. I'm choosing not to.
Yeah.
And what we're taught to just be this like utmost like polite, well, maybe we'll see. And you think you're, creating connection. You're actually driving yourself apart because you're just not being honest with a person. Because any sane friend of yours would understand your decision.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. But that the first instinct is to deflect by being indirect, right? Like, oh, I'd love to do that, but I can't, so that I don't go, oh, come on,
Yeah.
And you have to like make it weird and try to over-explain. But by owning it, you skip that too.
You skip that. And I do for sure struggle with this. And it's something that is a practice. And you can do it and not be an asshole. Could be like, oh, that sounds real. That sounds a lot of fun. But I'm training for a marathon right now, so I don't do anything on Friday nights.
Yeah.
It's the same thing, right? I'm not saying I have to or I can't. I'm like, and so you also can be very polite and respectful and still take ownership.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And not blame.
For sure. And in that way, model for your friends, in this case, owning how you would like to spend your time.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember I was actually recently in Vegas with some friends, and I was talking to my good friend Kevin, who, when in our early 20s, he couldn't go to a bachelor party of a mutual friend of ours. And because he lost his job, like maybe a month or two before the bachelor party. And he could have went there and then just like, either pouted or just had a miserable time. But at the time he was like, hey man, like I would love to go, but like I financially, this is not a possibility. And you know what? No, nobody cares. Everybody got it.
Yeah.
Everybody understood. Nobody was upset about it.
Yeah.
But we think like, well, I have to go do this. Like, yeah, you don't actually. If you're just clear with people usually understand.
Right? What a relief.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like we kind of covered like why it's scary to own a mistake. But if you want to double down on that, I think leading toward what have we done to try and make that safe to do here?
Yeah. I mean, right. I think we are just conditioned for whatever reason. I'm sure, my therapist could probably unpack like
Sure.
like where that comes from.
Right.
What was the second part of the question?
What have we done to make it safe to own mistakes here?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that we do a bunch of things, right? So we lead by example, and that starts with me, but then goes down to flock stars and flock leaders. Like that is really, really important. Everybody's ability to own it. We have a Flock Up of the Year award.
Yeah.
We now have a Slack channel. What's it called?
Carl's Flock Up.
Carl's Flock Up.
Yep.
And people can just put in there, hey, I fucked this up, which is a really fun thing. And then other things like we have all staff meetings, and sometimes I've done this a couple different times where I've asked, hey, what would it take for people to own mistakes? And they say the same thing. Like people love me owning mistakes, right?
Yeah.
But then I'll ask people to step to the mic in front of the entire company and be like, hey, I'll unburden anybody right now, and they'll come up and they'll say, I made mistake for X, and I'll go like, you are relieved. And it just,
so
you are
funny.
relieved.
You're free.
Yeah, you're free.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, just things like that. But it's a practice that is hard. It's not easy.
For sure. And like the whole public confessional thing, it feels so risky. Get up there in front of everyone and say something that you messed up. It's like, oh man.
Yeah.
That takes a lot of courage.
It takes a lot of courage, for sure. And it does feel a lot better. But there are for sure examples that I know that somebody has done that on a problem that they've taken ownership on something that they've already effed up multiple times.
Oh yeah.
And so in that moment, nobody gets publicly shamed at goodr, but then there has been following conversation of like, hey, you can't keep making that mistake and just saying I'm owning it.
Right.
Like that's so
Right.
so yeah. So you do have to be on the lookout for
It's not
that.
like a double jeopardy thing.
Yeah, no, it's not.
Hey, I already confessed to that,
No,
so we're
you
good.
don't,
right?
you don't get double.
Yeah. When I was standing around here when Dan suggested the Carl's Flock Up channel.
Yeah.
And then it got created like shortly after that. And I noticed, whenever you post a mistake in there, and then it's like quiet for maybe 30 minutes, nobody posts anything, and then it just get flooded. Like the seal broke, and everyone was like, in the spring of 2020, like just ripping off all these mistakes. Kind of a relief to see all your teammates piling on like that.
For sure. It's pretty fun. I mean, it actually is like it's a humorous read.
Yeah, definitely. So we try to create space for tough conversations where we can do this kind of thing. You just mentioned like at town hall, you'll do the you're relieved thing. But how else does that kind of forum play into having these types of conversations where we provide a platform for ownership in this way?
Yeah, I mean, town hall. For everybody who doesn't know, we have most Tuesdays we have an all staff meeting called Tuesdays with Carl. We shorthand it TWC. And it's a 2 hour, it's like a full-on produced event, and the roast rotates, blah, 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 blah. And I don't know, maybe 6 months ago, a year ago, created a section called Town Hall, where I just kind of talk about topics. Now I give the time away. And so there's an ownership piece there. There's a communication piece there. It is really, if I was to look at it through the eyes of ownership, it was a place of there's always so much going on here. Tuesdays with Carl is the one time where like the entire staff is focused. Mm-hmm. And so I'm like, well, let's create some space in there to knock off, whether it's anything like, hey, here's a quick update on something legal you need to know, or we're doing this initiative and we need help, or, let's talk about ownership. Mm-hmm. It just, it was created this idea of, we have focused people's attention, so let's create a space to have conversations. And sometimes they're fun and whimsical, sometimes they're super direct. But yeah, I would actually say it's less about ownership and way more about transparency and real-time information.
For sure. And it gives you a chance to communicate directly in real time with everyone at the company. I think that's taking ownership quite a bit, actually.
Yeah, for sure.
To say, hey, I'm rolling this out, or I'm making this change. What do we think? And like, that's a super vulnerable thing to do, to be like, all right, questions.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I mean, I do, when we do it, I do want questions. Anybody can like ask any questions. Also, you can sign up for open office hours with me afterwards and ask questions if you don't think about it in real time. Mm-hmm. And even just recently during town hall, I addressed something from the week before, because in real time, I didn't have my answer it wasn't clear. And I was like, all right, cool. You could call this ownership. It was like, it was just some clarity of like, hey, I want to give some clarity on so-and-so's questions from last week. Mm-hmm. I wasn't, in that moment, I wasn't thinking about the answer properly. Here's actually the answer.
Yeah. There you go. And then another thing I've seen happen in those cases is like, something would be presented. It's more or less seeming like, all right, stamp it. That's good to go. And then pause for questions. We get someone that comes up and asks like a really well thought out pushback.
Yeah.
Like, hey, I have resistance about this and here's why. And it's like, oh my God, that's genius. We need to dive into that and think about it. And it'll create projects that ultimately not only save us time and energy, but like put things on track.
For sure. And I mean, two things on that. One is a lot of times you just need one person to step to the mic
Yep.
and then more people will.
Yeah.
And so that is, I'm always just very grateful for the first person.
Yeah.
And then, there's TWC, but also we do a quarterly thing called PDA where we want that is actually really designed for friction. Where town hall, sometimes friction happens, but we want a PDA quarterly. We present ideas. It's called it stands for present, debate, align. And it's all three, but we encourage debate and dissent. Like, hey, we're thinking about doing this. What are holes? What are problems? And it's all these. There's all this ownership there, right? Where people present their ideas. They have to do it in a professional way. Then they get challenged in real time. So you have to take ownership for your ideas. You can't just throw something out in the ether. You actually have to answer questions about it.
Yeah.
And if somebody's presenting an initiative or something that you have an issue with or you don't like, or it's going to fuck up your world, you need to take ownership and step to that mic and get real clear on what you have an issue with. There's for sure been times where somebody goes, well, I wanted to ask this. I'm like, why didn't you?
Yep.
Well, you missed your chance.
So that was why we were doing this.
That's why we're doing this, yeah.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we say, because we rely on autonomy to get our roles done, and we provide a lot of support for that, taking ownership is the price of autonomy, right? Even PDA, what you just mentioned, a lot of people are working kind of in a silo up until that point. And then we share, hey, here are the conclusions I've reached, here are the things I'm working on. And that's the chance for everyone to own their role in it, ask their questions, things like that. So how does ownership play into supporting autonomy here?
Yeah, I always say the price for autonomy is, radical accountability, ownership, self-awareness. You kind of insert said word, but for somebody to really be autonomous and they need to fully be, we define ownership of like being self-aware and acting with integrity. And so that is like the utmost. If somebody is extremely self-aware and they're acting with integrity, handing over power for them to be autonomous is really, really easy. And that's the trade-off. The more you take ownership, the more you act with integrity, the more freedom you get here, right?
Yeah.
And I think I think our listeners could understand why that is, because when I just meet anybody, your marble jar is not full. Now it's not empty because I'm a pretty welcoming person. So you might have a couple handfuls in there, but the more autonomy you want, you got to fill that jar up.
Right.
And that comes over time.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's the only way. Trust is built over time. You can't be like, trust me.
Trust
okay.
me. Yeah. Trust. Pardon me if I don't.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Nice. So one of the things that we use as a tool here is communication and renegotiation, right? In support of autonomy and ownership. So how does that come up in our day-to-day work?
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea of, we'll use the example of me today, right? I did not, I need to own my own bandwidth, and I didn't. It's nobody else's fault. And right, if I ask you to take something on that's huge, well, you can, if you don't have the bandwidth, you're right. So it's on you to say, well, Steven, I can do that, but this is not going to get done.
Right.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Or your options are, you have three paths. You could say, sure, and just yes man me, and then either burn yourself out or deliver shitty work.
Right.
You can say no, which I'm going to be like, go on.
Let's say more.
Yeah. Or you can be like, hey, I'm working on X, Y, and Z. Happy to take this on, but I need to move something off or down the list. Right. And that is you taking ownership for your priorities and what's going on.
Yeah.
And that is expected here. I mean, goodr, this is actually a good question, because goodr is a group of high performers. And so this is actually something we probably need to be on the lookout even more than we are, of people just wanting to perform high at the risk of their own bandwidth. And so that's really important. And if you want to perform at a high level, you can do anything, but you can't do everything. Yeah. And that's really paramount to understand.
For sure. I think that's probably one of the hardest things. We always talk about during onboarding, like a deprogramming, reprogramming. It's so difficult to learn that you don't lose something. You actually gain trust by saying, oh, I can't do that and this. Which one is more important, right? And looking at it together versus just going, oh yeah, I got it, no problem. And then I got it, no problem. And then it's like, do you got it? Because it seems like a lot of problems.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, when somebody's working on a giant project and I'm like, oh, Shaun, how's that going? And you're like, oh, it's all good. Blah, blah. I'm like, hey, that doesn't make me feel comfortable.
I'm scared now.
Yeah. I'm actually scared. I would like for you to say, it's a lot. I have a healthy amount of stress, but we got this. I'm like, cool. You understand the gravity of what's going on. The all good is, I'm like, that doesn't make me feel all good. It actually makes me terrified.
For sure. I remember right when I moved down to LA, I came into your office and was like, Steven, I'm underwater. I'm dog paddling barely, and I know it, and I just need some patience while I sort this out. And you were like, thank you for telling me that. I would be surprised if you weren't. I was like, oh God, what a relief.
Yeah, right. You're relieved.
Yeah, exactly.
But on that note too, there is a flip side to this, which is, you need to give context and reason for most things in life. I would say, but you also can't just be like, oh, I don't have bandwidth for that, because eventually, we're a large enough company where you're like, cool. So it feels like you never have bandwidth for anything. That's also concerning.
Right. Yeah.
And so that's when there's that's kind of maybe when the integrity side of ownership eases in, because I think a lot of time when people are constantly over water, constantly overwhelmed, I think it's a function of a couple of things. I think it's a defense mechanism. They might be in the wrong job, right? They might just be doing the wrong work. They for sure might have bitten off more than they can chew, and they need to renegotiate it. There can be any number of things going on. It is, it's usually a combination of multiple things. But I guess that is the other side to this is your job. Our job as a leader is to, and this comes up when you trust somebody enough and they come to you, you should be good at understanding it or pushing back and being like, cool, walk me through where you're spending your time.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do want to own that there is multiple sides to this. It is not as easy as we might be making it sound.
For sure. On that note, I think you've done a good job of recognizing when like, okay, here, do this, and then we'll see how it goes, right? Like setting up a project, but not painting it done, realizing when you haven't painted it done enough to go, all right, I trust that Shaun's not going to spend 2 days on this. Like you'll go, hey, I want this, this, and this. This should probably take you 2 hours.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, now I'm thinking in the frame of what can I get done in 2 hours? And my mind is able to process it instead of like, all right, okay, I just got to figure out all of this somehow. And then I could easily go down some crazy rabbit hole.
For sure. I mean, I try, and one thing I've been trying to do is actually give people a little more like game plans. But yeah, it is, as leaders, like you need to lead and you need to understand what's going on. And sometimes that's like holding space. Sometimes that is pushing back on people, right? Sometimes that is you taking ownership, and sometimes that is handing ownership back over to someone. Like it is very nuanced.
Yeah. For sure. All right. So we tend to think in terms of process over results, or focusing on the work versus the end product, right? So that helps us to see failures as a breakdown in our system and our process versus like a personal problem.
Yeah.
Have you seen that lead to better systems overall at goodr?
Oh, for sure. Right. The one I'll talk about is at TWC, we real-time report our revenue every week. Yeah. So for our listeners, just so you understand this. All right. If there's 52 weeks in a year, and for each of our channels, so like, key accounts, specialty retail, goodr.com, the Cabana, global, we have a goal that we're trying to hit for the whole year for each of those channels. And we know what % of our year in each channel is January versus February versus March versus April. We know what % of our year should be in every week, right? So understand that, right? So so we have our projections built out by week. And so starting in January, we are looking at where are we at on the year? All of our channels are being reported transparently at TWC, so we can understand, are we off track? Are we on track? And the goal there isn't to punish people, get people in trouble. It's to us to understand where we are, have a clear picture, and then we can react appropriately. And reaction is sometimes like, oh, wow, we are way over target, so we need to need to figure our inventory situation. Maybe we need to order more product, or we're off on this target. Great. Does that mean we need to cut spending somewhere? And that is one way we've taken ownership of actually understanding where our revenue comes from. And every week we are on the same page of where we are. And so we never get blindsided on targets.
Yeah. I think something that is in there that might have gotten missed as you were saying it is like, if we're over, that's not just a celebration. That also means something. That's important information to our team who's managing inventory, right? All right, that's going to mean something later.
Yeah, or our DC team, right? It's like, they might not be staffed appropriately.
Yeah.
If we're 20% over on the year and their staffing was based on this, like then we got to hire more people there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. Because I think for a long time, and it's probably easy for a lot of businesses to think like, oh, we're crushing it. Great, we're doing awesome, and not recognizing that's going to be a problem for someone at some point.
For sure. And we've learned this painfully. So
ouch. Yeah. That's why we're doing this podcast, everyone. You're welcome.
Yeah. Learn from our mistakes, please.
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of that, if let's say someone is a manager listening to this podcast right now, they like the idea of making it safe to own mistakes, but just either haven't done a great job of that or aren't sure how to approach it. What do you say to them?
I mean, first and foremost, you have to lead by example and use every opportunity, small or big, to own mistakes. Because if you don't make it okay, then they're not going to think it's okay. So that's number one. And then number two is create a small space, a small container at first for people to fail in. And then the more you trust them, the bigger it gets, right? And it's the trust that earns over time. So somebody that's new to your team, somebody that's unexperienced, right? You create the space and you let them fail on things that they can fail at.
Yeah.
So by the time they are handling stuff that if they fail, it's much bigger of a deal. You actually know conceptually, I can trust this person, right? Because this isn't blind faith, right?
Right.
Just being like, oh, cool, I'm going to let let you fail.
You got this.
No,
yeah.
That is the bigger opportunities people have. Like that is earned over a long period of time. And so but it starts with a very small space, and then you get it bigger, and you get it bigger, and you get it bigger over time.
Yeah. So even like to make that super practical, what's something where someone who just starts, if you're coaching me as a flock leader, like, hey, it's okay to let them fail on this, but not that. Like,
right. So somebody on part of the onboarding for whenever I've had like a new assistant or somebody I work closely with, they have to build a presentation. So presentations are really important here.
Yeah.
And especially for me, how dialed you are building a deck is incredibly important. And so one of the first things is teach them how, but then be like, all right, make me a presentation I want a 5-minute presentation on, your like where you grew up. And then I sit there and then I'll be like, cool. I will just poke a hole, like here, and here. Cause that's a whole learning, right? That is actually designed for them to learn.
Right.
And so that is that's a small example. And then you can eventually get bigger and bigger and bigger. At goodr, presenting. So it starts by maybe having somebody present at TWC and then ask somebody to present at PDA. Yeah. And you watch this and you create spaces for somebody to present an idea. And by the time you are, giving them a major stage, hopefully you've kind of vetted that out. And so, right, I mean, there is such an insane amount of opportunity. The reason we don't do it is it does take time. Yeah. Right. Like it is. We want everybody to walk in, knowing everything. You actually have to create the space for people to fail and then be willing to coach them through the failure.
For sure. And then on the ownership side, recognize if you're hearing yourself saying, well, they should this or that, go, well, did I set that expectation or do I just have that and it's hidden?
Yeah. And then, should's a fascinating word, right. But hey, the people, they should know that. Did you tell them? Like, how would they know that?
Yeah, exactly.
And then on the flip side of that, though, somebody you've worked with long enough, they know it.
There are things they should know.
And also people in my circle, they're the ones that know when they fuck up before I do. Right.
And they're in your office going, I fucked up.
I fucked up. Yeah. So, but no, it is a really important thing as a leader to lead by example and create smaller spaces and get them bigger and bigger and bigger, right? The analogy is, as a kid, can be out in the backyard by herself, then can go around the block, and then it starts getting bigger and bigger, and then next thing you know, you have a car and you are completely out of touch. But you don't start that way. You earn that.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Earn your keys.
Yeah, for sure.
Nice. Cool. Well, anything you want to answer again or didn't get to bring up during our conversation here?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the other, we didn't harp on self-awareness, but self-awareness is just a really big part of this, like knowing thyself. And that bleeds into any number of things. I mean, knowing when you fuck up, or knowing if you have a hard time admitting when you make a mistake, asking somebody to help you with that.
Yeah.
And so I think self-awareness is very tightly wrapped up in ownership.
For sure.
Yeah.
Expanding our blind spots hurts at first,
Yeah.
but it's ultimately good for us.
Yeah. Anything you want to add on here?
Ooh, I mean, I feel like we kind of covered the bases. Yeah. Just keeping in mind that there's always a both sides of the table kind of thing, right? Leadership has just as much ownership as everyone else, and keeping the balance there and fairness there.
Yeah.
Especially in like expressing ownership in the way that we would want others to express ownership too. Like if we wouldn't accept a certain explanation, not trying to offer those same things ourselves, like you say, just really leading by example and being aware enough to catch ourselves being like, I probably could have done better, and then trying again.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, cool. Any other advice or next actions we can share?
Make sure to time block appropriately when recording a podcast.
Fair.
Yeah, that's it.
Nice.
Thanks for listening to the Culture Gooder podcast. To submit questions for the podcast, learn more about our culture, and learn how you can status the quote challenge, head over to goodr.com/culture. And don't forget to subscribe to us wherever you're listening, including on YouTube, where you can now watch all of our new episodes. Who knows? You might even catch a glimpse of Carl at our headquarters if he's not already passed out at the tiki bar from all the margaritas.